Today I'm going to show you when full frame isn't actually full frame in the Sony A7 III. This is specific to the video mode, but it's well worth knowing about if you do use the A7 III, especially in NTSC mode. Now, one of my subscribers from Lithuania brought my attention to this, and it's really quite interesting and really quite surprising. The guys at the YouTube page globalshop.lt asked this question: why is NTSC not full frame when PAL is full frame? First of all, I thought you guys may have had it in the actual crop mode by mistake. So I checked it on my own A7 III, and sure enough, NTSC in 30p crops when you're in the full frame mode. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. Now, if you're not sure what NTSC and PAL modes are, I've already done a video showing the differences between these two and why you would choose one over the other. So if you want to see that video, click on the eye in the corner or the link in the description. So I have my camera on the tripod and I've set it up next to this table. I've got these two old batteries right at the edges of the frame and I'm in NTSC mode at the moment. I'm going to switch it from NTSC to PAL. This is in tab 5, page 2 of 7, NTSC PAL selector. I'll select this and then press enter. The camera will switch itself off and on again. If you do have an SD card in, it will ask you if you want to format it. But if you've got some information on that card that you want to keep, make sure you say no. And if you're using the A7R2s or the A7S II, make sure you do this without the SD card in, because it formats it automatically. And now look at the frame. Those batteries are a little bit further into the frame, showing that the PAL setting is actually using the full sensor, whereas the NTSC mode is not using the full frame sensor. First of all, I thought it may just default to the crop mode when you switch to NTSC, but I switched both different modes into Super 35 crop mode, and this is not the case. So as you can see, the Super 35mm crop mode is exactly the same from NTSC to PAL. In PAL mode, if you switch to HD, it still has the same frame as it has in 4K 25p. And even when you switch it to 100 frames a second, it'll still have the same crop. So then I decided to try the same thing in NTSC mode, and this is when it all made sense. When the camera is in XAVCS 4K at 30 frames a second, or 30p for short, this is when it crops, and quite significantly. In 24 frames a second or 24p, it uses the full frame again, and also in 120p HD. Interestingly, in 30 frames a second and 60 frames a second HD, it also uses the full frame. Thinking about it, the only reason that Sony has had to make this crop is probably because of those extra frames from 24 to 30 in that 4K mode. They've probably had to crop in on that full frame just a little bit to cope with this extra data. Now, if you shoot in PAL only, or if you just use the 24 frames a second and maybe the 120 frames or the 60 frames a second in the HD mode, this shouldn't matter too much, and you probably haven't noticed it. But if you shoot in 30 frames a second, this may be a bit of a problem, especially when you frame up your shot and then switch over to slow motion at 120 frames a second, or vice versa. One thing I found really interesting is when I put it alongside my A7R II, I found that the A7R II doesn't crop in, so that's a full frame. So it's only on the A7 III. They're both 30 frames a second, they're both in NTSC, and as you can see, the A7 III is cropped in quite a bit. Now, have you noticed this cropping in 30p 4K full frame filming? If you have, let me know in the comments below. It'll be great to hear your experiences with it. Also, if you have the A7R III and the A7R IV, it'll be interesting to see if these crop in on it or not. Also, if you've noticed any other strange things when you change between settings, let me know in the comments below. I remember when the A7 III first came out, Caleb Pike over on DSLR Shooter noticed a slight change in the framing between 4K full frame and 4K Super 35mm crop. What he found was that it actually stretched the image just slightly. Now, what we found is slightly different to this, but it's interesting nevertheless. And if you're shooting at 30 frames a second 4K in NTSC, And if you're switching across to the slow-mo modes, you may notice this change in framing. It's a little bit weird and it's a little bit off-putting. And also it's a little bit strange that they've had to crop in on this. But like I've already said, I think it's because of that extra data that these extra frames are gonna produce. Thanks once again to you guys over at Global Shop LT in Lithuania. I really appreciate you guys pointing this out to me so I can make this video, making sure everyone is aware of this issue. So thank you. For more videos, subscribe and make sure you click on the notification bell. Also head over to my YouTube channel where I have a growing library of photography and videography tutorials. I'll see you next time.